Let's grow together. And now, Reverend Martin.
Many of you know that I spent a number of years, 21 as a matter of fact, touring mostly the US and Canada, but occasionally foreign ports as well, with a tribute to Liberace musical production. And it was one of the great experiences of my life. And along the way, I became interested in spiritual matters, and I discovered science of mind. I started taking classwork, and we used to have something called Science of Mind 100 series, which is now known as Foundations. And one of our assignments in that class was to pick out something that might have seemed unlikely at the time, but was going to be an exercise to stretch our faith. I picked out something rather audacious. I decided I wanted to appear as Liberace with symphony orchestras throughout the US and Canada. It took a little while for it to happen, but I kept my mind fixated on that, and it eventually did. I acquired a management team from Kansas City area, and they had the contacts to make this happen. And beginning in 2007, I started appearing all over the place with orchestras doing a show called Pops Goes Vegas. It had showgirls with feathers and rhinestones. It had singers and had an impressionist. It had Liberace also with feathers and rhinestones. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I got 3 solo spots with the orchestra, and I participated in 3 production numbers. One of the production numbers ran about 11 and a half minutes. It was a monster medley called Songs from the Strip. And it was everything from Wayne Newton to the Rat Pack to Liberace and on and on. And the centerpiece of this monster medley was built that I wore, which was sort of an Austrian military dress uniform from the 1800s, 5 pounds of rhinestones on it, gold braid. This mic is cutting. Yeah. And the real focal point of that particular costume was a pair of high boots, also encrusted. Let's take a pause and switch mics. So if you all, while we're switching, if you'll go into your pockets and your purses. That's all right. I think is it turned on? Yes. Okay. How's this? No, no. All right. So where was I? Oh, yes, it was that pair of boots, and right in the middle of this monster medley was the Nancy Sinatra song, These Boots Were Made for Walking. And I walked out on that particular thing and did a little dance, and then went to the piano and did I'll Be Seeing You and things like that. So anyway, that medley, the centerpiece of the medley was that pair of boots. We arrived in Oklahoma City one week, and Thursday was rehearsal day with the orchestra, and Friday was show opening day. They did a cut-down version of the show on Friday mornings called a coffee concert, and then we did Friday evening, Saturday evening, and Sunday matinee. So Thursday, in between rehearsing my numbers with the orchestra, I was in my dressing room unpacking the costume trunks and discovered, much to my horror, there was no pair of boots. Somehow the boots had not been packed for this particular trip. The show opened the next morning. What to do? What do you do when you're met with an unexpected emergency? And how, with something as bizarre as a missing pair of knee-high rhinestoned boots, how can faith help you out? Well, years ago, when I was driving around the country, I saw a marquee on a Baptist church, and the slogan on the front of the sign said, "Is faith your steering wheel or your spare tire?" Now, if you think about it for a moment, it's no good trying to buy a spare tire after you get a flat. It's like locking the barn door after the horse has escaped. And it's no good trying to whip up faith in the unexpected moment that you need it. Think about this for a minute. Can you perform CPR? Well, you can do it now if you've already studied it and worked on it. And you can do it in the future if you start working on it right now. But if you don't know how, and you need to now, you're out of luck, and so is your patient. Now, firefighters train constantly so that when they're called upon to act in an emergency situation, they can act almost on autopilot, hesitating for just a moment to think about how to react in a situation can allow the fire to grow out of control. In an emergency, firefighters need to know exactly how to respond. The proper response in any emergency only comes from training and preparation. Now, the primary reason for our spiritual practice is to prepare ourselves for whatever comes our way. And so it is that faith comes by study and prayer and by meditation and by positive activity. Constantly walking our talk causes a positive faith to become habitual whenever we face adversity. And when our spiritual practice becomes habitual, we can stamp out the fires in our lives before they become raging infernos. It's a bit like trying to build a house. If you're trying to build a house, you start with a solid foundation. And likewise with faith. Faith begins with a solid foundation. Jesus spoke about this in one of his parables. He said, "Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. And when a flood came, the torrent struck the house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rain comes down, the streams rise, and the winds blow and beat upon that house, and it falls with a great crash." Now, the Gospel of Matthew tells us that God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So in other words, what we call good and what we call bad happen to everyone. The important thing is whether or not we're prepared. The Boy Scouts got it right. Be prepared. A number of years ago when I lived in Fort Lauderdale, I was watching a TV newscast in the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew, which was a Category 5 storm. And a TV news crew was on assignment in a South Florida neighborhood viewing the widespread destruction of Hurricane Andrew. And the camera panned one area where, in the midst of all the devastation and debris, one lone house was still standing on its foundation. And the owner was cleaning up the yard when a reporter approached him and said, "Sir, why is your house the only one still standing? How did you manage to escape the severe damage of the storm?" And the man replied, "I built this house myself. I built it according to the Florida State Building Codes. When the code calls for 2x6 roof trusses, I used 2x6 roof trusses. I was told that a house built according to code could withstand a hurricane. So I did, and it did. It could also be that no one else around here followed the code." Now, this was a man who understood that the storms were coming. It had nothing to do with him. Whether he was a good person or a bad person was immaterial. It was about the area in which he lived and the nature of tropical storms. So his job was to be prepared. And when the sun was shining and the skies were blue, it may have seemed silly to put all the extra expense and effort into building a hurricane-proof house. But when the storm came, it was anything but foolish. It was absolute wisdom. Now, The important thing is not trying to understand all the reasons why the storms come. Leave that to the meteorologists. No, the important thing is to be prepared for them before they happen. A number of years ago, a saying was making the rounds, "It's all good." No matter what happened, people would say, "It's all good." Now, you'll not hear me say that. I don't say that everything that happens to you is good. There's a lot of stuff that happens in life that we may not appreciate. The difficulties that you face in life can be agonizing, but they are opportunities for you to grow. But it's easy to lose sight of this when you're hurting and struggling. I read about a pastor who visited a church member who had just undergone spinal surgery, and the pastor asked, "My brother, what has God taught you through your back surgery?" And the man replied, "God has taught me that back surgery hurts like hell." Well, in the midst of a crisis, you can forget that God is good all the time and that this is an opportunity for something good to be born. It's so easy to focus on the negatives, but you can shift your focus from your pain, fear, and discouragement to the fact that there is a gift in every situation. Another saying that made the rounds a few years ago was, "Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional." Now, I don't want to go around affirming that pain is inevitable. However, I do like the part about suffering being optional. If I experience pain, then I can choose to use it as a catalyst for positive change. You know, they say that trees need the powerful spring winds to flex their trunks and main branches so that the sap is drawn up to nourish the budding leaves. Strong winds also stimulate a tree's root growth. And in the same way, perhaps we need the winds of life, even though we dislike experiencing them. So remember that deep roots grow where strong winds blow. Ernest Holmes, writing in the Science of Mind textbook, tells us, "Those who have great faith have great power." Faith is an affirmative mental approach to reality. So remember that when faith says yes, the law says yes. There is a power in the universe that honors our faith in it, and it may take us increments of living to make this come to its highest expression. But we can move from "nothing ever seems to work out for me" to "everything is going to be okay" to "everything is okay" to "everything is going to be great" to "everything is great." Ernest Holmes tells us that faith does not call for great concentration, but for deep realization and conviction. But he also said that if we allow the world's opinions to control our thinking, then that will be our demonstration. So in a practical sense, how do we build our faith? No one was born with faith. Faith is created, developed, and nurtured by our own thoughts and actions, which raises the question, is faith for the delusional? Is faith for the Pollyanna? Actually, optimal faith is based on truth with a capital T. So having faith in God and having faith in the laws of mind and spirit are the most logical ways we can live our lives. Ernest Holmes again. In order to have faith, we must have a conviction that all is well. In order to keep faith, we must allow nothing to enter our thought, which will weaken that conviction. Faith is built up from belief, acceptance, and trust. Whenever anything enters our thought which destroys in any degree one of these attitudes, to that extent, faith is weakened. belief, acceptance, and trust. Last year, I did a talk about faith, and that jumped out at me, belief, acceptance, and trust. Since I was a little boy, I've been a Batman fan, and belief, B, action or acceptance, A, and trust, T, spells out BAT. So that's how I choose to remember it in my mind. Belief, a conviction of the truth of something, and this may only be intellectual. So faith goes beyond that intellectual knowing, and it includes trust and confidence. Because let's face it, most of us believe things that we don't act upon. For example, we know that certain foods are not healthy, but we eat them anyway. Belief, acted upon, which includes acceptance. Holmes says, how much can we accept? How much can we find in our consciousness that's no longer repudiated by our own denials? Whatever that is, that much we can have. Do you believe in a God that can heal? Maybe you've seen God heal others, but maybe you think for whatever reason your condition is beyond hope. Do you believe in a God that supplies abundance in every moment? Perhaps you've seen others who miraculously escaped the bondage of debt, and yet for whatever reason you don't think it could happen to you. We've seen and heard other stories, but somehow we get the idea that they don't apply to us. Belief, acceptance, and trust. To trust in the law of good, Ernest tells us, is to constantly believe that we are surrounded by a power which can and will cast all fear from our minds, free us from all bondage, and set us safe and satisfied in a new order of being. And that means that no matter what is happening, no matter how bad things look, we trust that a perfect outcome already exists for us. Our job is to claim that outcome, to constantly believe that God is all there is, that God is good all the time, that God is here right now no matter what I'm going through, and that God has a solution for any obstacle I may meet. B.A.T, belief, acceptance, and trust. Well, anytime the concept comes up, people say, what about my feelings? I always like to go with my feelings. Well, I read about a salesman who knew that he needed to be calling on prospects, but he would sit in his office and think, it's a little early to be calling on people, so maybe I'll read a couple of articles in this sales magazine and maybe I'll learn something new. And so he reads a couple of articles, but then he realizes, it's getting too close to lunch to call upon prospects, so maybe I'll do it after I have some lunch. And on the day goes, and first thing you know, he's called on no one. Now, that's not a dead end, however, because he went from feeling sorry for himself to a feeling of generating a successful emotion, and then he followed that with action. He went from feeling sorry for himself because he had made no sales to feeling sorry for his prospects. He affirmed, they'll have no choice but to buy from me. Which is why William James said that feeling follows action. I read about a study many years ago at a psychiatric hospital, and they asked all the patients, just for 1 week, act as if you're normal. And it actually helped them. Feeling follows action. Ernest Holmes again, in a book called Hidden Power for Human Problems, you are growing rapidly when you can say, I am believing and knowing in spite of what I feel. My feelings tell me it's no use trying, and then I switch to my power of choice and declare that my faith is in what I believe to be the law of God's creative process, rather than my negative feelings about it. You shall know the truth, and the truth, not your feelings, shall set you free. So don't trust your feelings, choose your feelings. Change your feelings. by right action. As we know, we always see more than we actually notice. This is the whole concept of the reticular activating system. We always see more than we notice. Our minds filter out the things that it deems unimportant. But as we spring into action, our reticular activating system actively starts looking for whatever we need in the moment to successfully complete our task. If I waited for inspiration to strike before starting work on my weekly talk, I'd probably never get started. It's when I sit down and start to work that the ideas I need appear. Occasionally, someone will come up to me and say, "Where do you get your sermons?" And I am tempted to say, I buy them from Sermons R Us. But the truth is, they come from the one mind. However, they do not show up until I make my demand. Action always comes before the demonstration. An author named Howard Walker said, "We live by faith or we don't live at all. Either we venture or we vegetate. If we venture, we do so by faith because we cannot know the end of anything by the beginning. By faith, we move mountains of opposition, or we're stopped by molehills." I admire anybody who can have a neat turn of phrase, and I love this. We either venture or we vegetate. Now, the idea of faith as a reflex suggests an automatic ingrained response to circumstances, similar to a physical reflex. It implies a deep-seated habitual trust in God that manifests in actions and attitudes without conscious deliberation. What I'm calling faith on the fly, staying rooted in principle, knowing that all things work together for good to those who love God. Faith on the fly is faith that has become so much a habit, it becomes like your favorite comfy bathrobe. You just automatically get into it. Here's a more detailed explanation of faith as an automatic response. Just as a physical reflex is an automatic response to a stimulus, faith, when deeply rooted, can become an automatic response to life's situations. Now, this does not mean that faith is purely instinctual, but rather that it becomes so ingrained through consistent practice and reliance on God that it becomes a natural reaction. So how do we develop spiritual reflexes? Practices like prayer, meditation, and studying spiritual literature, maybe joining one of our Tuesday book clubs. These things can cultivate those spiritual reflexes. For example, instead of reacting immediately with worry or frustration, a believer with developed faith reflexes might first turn to prayer or seek Spirit's guidance and peace. Stay calm and carry on is as good a description of faith on the fly as I've found anywhere. And then, bearing all that in mind, faith in action. Because true faith is not just intellectual assent, it also involves action. As the Apostle Paul said, faith without works is dead. And this means that faith should be demonstrated through practical positive actions that are in harmony with your beliefs. Or as we like to say, treat and move your feet. In essence, the concept of faith as a reflex highlights the importance of developing a deeply rooted, habitual trust in God that shapes our thoughts, attitudes, and actions, leading to a life transformed by faith. There is an answer and a right answer to every problem. There's probably more than one right answer, but there's always at least one. So you can move from everything's going to be okay to everything is okay, to everything is going to be great, to everything is great. There are a couple of interesting passages in the Bible. In the book of Isaiah, we find this, God speaking here. Before they call, I will answer. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. And Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew is quoted as saying, your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask. Before they call, I will answer. I read about a convent in Eastern Europe in the 1930s, which had fallen on hard times. It was also an orphanage. And they were down to their last little coin. And there wasn't enough money for food or for clothing, and the winter was coming. And a bishop happened to be visiting this convent orphanage, and he took that one lone coin and threw it out the window and said, now we will rely on God. And packages arrived that afternoon full of clothing, along with a check for several $1,000s. Before they call, I will answer. Your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask. Well, that's all well and good, you're thinking, but what about those knee-high rhinestone boots? It was Thursday afternoon, and I needed those things the next morning. Symphony orchestras play what's on the page. You don't say, hey, play a few bars of this or that. They've got to have it. And there was no time to rewrite that monster medley. Well, what a weird thing. My manager, who lived in Kansas City, happened to be at Busch Gardens, Tampa. I lived in Tampa Bay at the time. He was selling another one of the shows that he managed to Busch Gardens for their summer activities. And my cat sitter had been a costumer for Busch Gardens, and she was able to find the boots and hustle them over to Tampa, and David took them and flew to Oklahoma City, and the show went on as planned. Now, you may say that's a trivial exercise of faith, but it wasn't for me at that particular time. And bear in mind Raymond Charles Barker's words when he said, this stuff works, whether you're trying to manifest a hot meal or a hot time. Ernest Holmes again, faith is a mental attitude which is so convinced of its own idea, which so completely accepts it, that any contradiction is unthinkable and impossible. There are times in life when we may not be able to see clearly. Visibility may be poor, and we have to live by faith. We're making decisions based on our spiritual beliefs rather than on what things look like. We have nothing to navigate by externally, but internally, we are moving into that which the universe has to offer us. And even in a monster storm, if the pilot keeps climbing to a higher altitude, he or she will rise to the place where the sun always shines. There, the sky is clear. The winds aren't blowing. There's no storm going on because they've chosen to rise above. You've probably heard this wonderful poem by William Ernest Henley. It's called Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet, the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. How can you have faith in times of crisis? You must cultivate a faith in God when you are not in crisis. Because faith on the fly isn't just the faith that gets you by. It's the faith that lets you fly. And so it is.